Next, let's invite the recipients of the noblest Order of Gard, the Knights of St. Michael and St. George, the Knights of Bath, the Victorian Cross, and lower knights, leaders of the anti-colonial cause, bell ringers of the East India Company, heroes of the Crimean War, academicians of the Royal Society, lifelong friends of great literary figures such as Dickens and Dumas, staunch supporters of scientific stars such as Faraday and Darwin, assistant deputy and permanent deputy heads of departments such as the Ministry of the Interior and Navy of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, the first Cabinet Secretary and Civil Chief of the Kingdom, the first batch of graduates of this school, and the most prominent in history. Distinguished alumnus, Sir Arthur Hastings, delivered a speech at the 50th anniversary celebration of the University of London. Arthur's gaze swept across the stage, looking at the young faces and murmuring, "Agares, what do you think I should say?" The phantom of the Red Devil drifted behind him, and saliva almost flowed from the corner of his mouth. "Look at these ignorant souls, they still worship you as a hero. Why don't they say something they like to hear?" Arthur took a deep breath and let out a deafening roar, "Oxford is all raised by a bunch of bitches." "Oh!" Thunderous applause erupted from the audience. "Cambridge is the same," he immediately added. The applause became even more enthusiastic. The protagonist possessed by demons travels through 19th-century England, with a demonic worldview, keywords of the novel. Shadow of Great Britain without pop-ups. Download the complete set of Shadow of Great Britain TXT, and read the latest chapters of Shadow of Great Britain. Chapter 1. Arthur Hastings. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Arthur Hastings. When the first ray of sunlight in the morning shone through the blinds into the bedroom, the bed with white sheets was already empty, and the owner of the bedroom had already washed up. At this moment, he had put on his clothes and came to the mirror to tidy up his appearance. In front of the tall floor mirror, Arthur Hastings was calmly and meticulously tying every button on his tailcoat. A pitch-black round top-high hat, a deep blue high-neck tailcoat, wearing dark gray riding boots, slim-fitting white pants paired with shiny silver buttons and a leather belt. A thick and slender wooden baton is pinned to the right of the belt, and a police officer's knife with a prominent Victorian style is hung in the left scabbard. He looked at himself in the mirror, waved his hand and dusted off the dust on his left arm's blue and white sleeve before nodding slightly. "Wearing this uniform, you look really decent." TSK, who would have thought that such a noble and outstanding young man would be a villain who has signed a contract with the devil? An evil and cold greeting sounded in Arthur's ear. Strangely, there was no one else in the mirror except Arthur. But in Arthur's view, it is clearly not so. His deep black eyes flickered with a faint red glow. "If it weren't for your gift, I would be sitting on the London Stock Exchange or Bank at this moment, admiring the beautiful scenery on both sides of the Thames, enjoying food and coffee, and trading stocks worth hundreds or even millions of pounds." Just a few words can make those who fall into the trap of money go crazy. Instead of using a weekly subsidy of 12 shillings to travel around the dirtiest and chaotic East End of London, risking one's life to deal with thieves and murderers, a phantom figure gradually solidified in front of Arthur. That is a young man wearing a colorful acrobatic suit, a clown hat, a clown nose, exaggerated red and white makeup, sharp eyes, and long horns on his head. He lay horizontally on the frame of the floor mirror, staring intently at Arthur with his eyes covered in red blood. Arthur was stunned for a while before frowning slightly and saying, "Agares, what are you dressed up for today?" As soon as the words fell, a frenzied laughter echoed in Arthur's ear, as if piercing through his eardrums, lifting his spiritual cover and roof together. "Happy April Fool's Day, Arthur." Agares smiled back and forth, feeling proud of Arthur's bewildered expression just now. Arthur looked coldly at the eccentric devil, then calmly bent down and picked up the red nose that had fallen to the ground. "Here, your nose has dropped." Agares lifted 3 fingers and gently twisted his red nose, while correcting with a beaming expression. "Oh, my dear Arthur. This is not my nose, but my breakfast for today." "Your breakfast?" Arthur fixed his gaze, and only then did he realize that there was a painful face growing on the red-headed nose, and this face was somewhat familiar to him. Oh! Isn't this Professor Demps? It's been over 6 months since I graduated. Have you been living well during these days? Arthur, please don't let this demon torture me anymore. I admit it was my fault to deliberately make things difficult for you academically, but didn't I already arrange for you to graduate smoothly afterwards? Why do you still treat me like this? Arthur turned a deaf ear to Professor Demps's pleading and simply shook his finger lightly. Mr. Demps, what you said is unfair. Let me restore the facts for you. The reason why you allowed me to graduate smoothly is not because of your conscience, but because I broke your good deed when you were about to force Eliza. And the reason why I happened to be there is because everything was originally arranged by me. At that time, you promised me that as long as I didn't reveal this matter, you would be willing to do anything. Since that's the case, it's only natural to sacrifice one's soul, right? But... Before Demps could finish speaking, Agares threw him into his mouth. With a fierce chew, crimson blood dripped down the corners of his mouth. I saw Agares's facial features tightly clenched into a ball, and as his throat twitched, accompanied by Demps's painful cries, the devil contentedly rubbed his stomach and let out a loud burp. For breakfast, this meal is just too sumptuous. Arthur was clearly accustomed to such bloody scenes, and he even had the leisure to ask, how does it taste? Agares's half-meter-long tongue scraped past the corner of his mouth like a wiper, rolling the last bit of blood and residue into his mouth. Fragrant, but a bit smelly. All right, let me see what I should have for lunch next. Agares snapped his fingers, and as flames danced around his fingertips, a recipe wrapped in cowhide cover appeared out of thin air in his palm. He flipped through a few pages casually, and suddenly his eyes lit up, pointing to one of the portraits and shouting at Arthur, "Hey Arthur, what do you think of this?" Arthur was tidying up his sideburns when he took a moment to glance at the menu, which depicted a beautiful girl with long light golden hair and a white umbrella with lace edges. He casually asked, "Do you want to eat Eliza?" Agares closed his eyes and fantasized, his mouth uncontrollably dribbling. "If I remember correctly, this young lady seems to have some interest in you, right? Girls in love are the easiest to fall for scams. Just a little bit of your charm with nowhere to hide, and you can easily put her into my mouth. A young girl who was betrayed by her lover and lost all hope, just thinking about it, she knows it's a delicious food in the world. Perhaps you can add some seasoning. Arthur, do you think that after deceiving her, if you chop her legs more than 10 times in front of her, will it add some flavor? Aren't you afraid of a bitter mouth?" Agares clasped his hands together and smiled. "Oh, my dear Arthur, you misunderstood my meaning. When I said I wanted you to have sex, I didn't mean to have sex with a woman, that's too conventional. Remember, I'm a devil." Arthur was not angry at the words, he just picked up the black tea cup in front of the table and took a soft sip. "Do demons like to have sex with men?" Agares's head suddenly swelled, and his facial features, deformed with anger, were almost on top of Arthur's head. "Arthur! Not all demons like to have sex with men. I'm talking about you, it's you. Don't misinterpret what I mean." But Arthur obviously didn't accept this trick, and he had long been accustomed to Agares' scary tricks. "So only you like it? Agares, you're too unsociable. I'm asking you to have sex with a man." Agares roared, his voice blowing Arthur's hair in the wind. Arthur replied calmly, "I refuse." "Why?" "Because the burden is too heavy." "Is it right with Eliza?" "For me." Agares was like a deflated ball, his whole body instantly deflated, leaving only a piece of leather lying on the carpet. Okay. Anyway, you can trick Eliza first, and we can discuss the matter of cheating again." "I refuse." "Why is this time?" "This is mainly for 2 reasons. Firstly, Eliza and I have no vested interests, and she has also helped me with Professor Demps's case. Because I am a conscientious person, I do not intend to seek revenge. Oh. What did I hear? Conscience. Arthur, I didn't expect a poor kid like you to have such luxury goods. Agares's skin suddenly swelled, and his illusory body extended its head into Arthur's chest, wriggling his neck around without any hindrance. This place is pitch black and empty, I can't see anything. Conscience. Where is that golden heart? Agares saw that Arthur did not answer him and continued to shout, Arthur, can you hear me speaking? Speaking. Speaking. Arthur simply replied lightly, I may not have a conscience, but at the same time, I am extremely certain that my heart is not broad enough to produce an echo. As soon as he finished speaking, Arthur picked up his teacup and drank it all in one gulp. In no time, Agares came back holding his wet head. He conjured up a handkerchief out of thin air and wiped his head, speaking discontentedly, then you can go on to the second point. Secondly, it's because you have no credibility with me. You said you would help me, but you didn't do it. Why didn't I do it? Agares was furious, with flames burning above his head and boiling oil rolling over his hair. You said you wanted to go to college, so I put in a lot of effort to arrange for an old gentleman with a confused mind to be your cheap uncle, and used his connections to push you into the newly established University of London. As an exchange, you will provide me with a continuous stream of soul. This is all agreed upon by us. Now that you have become an excellent college graduate as you wish, my promise has been fulfilled, and it's your turn to fulfill your chips. Arthur turned a blind eye to Agares' anger and said coldly, I am honored to be called an excellent college graduate by you. It would be great if those bankers and politicians also think the same way. Oh. Agares couldn't help but grit his teeth and suppress his smile upon hearing this, but the smile at the corner of his eye still betrayed him. Arthur, don't be so pessimistic. I believe that one day the University of London will definitely receive a teaching charter from the royal family and Parliament. By then, your degree will be recognized by society. However, before that, you still need to be patient. A devil who tells me to endure. Arthur loosened his collar, trying to make his neck more comfortable. Agares, I think you should just become the Christ revered by Calvinism. The profession of devil is not suitable for you. Or, you already knew that the University of London could not obtain a charter, so you deliberately wanted me to attend this university that is not qualified to award a degree, in order to cultivate my anti-social personality and better help you with things. Agares's mouth was almost as wide as his earlobe. He crossed his fingers and whispered softly, Arthur, you're really a little worm in my stomach. You're going to see through my little bit of caution. But how do you know what I'm thinking? Arthur glanced at him, picked up his cowhide bag, and opened the door. Of course, it's because it's not the first time I've experienced it. Having gained knowledge but couldn't find the right job, this approach will definitely turn people into rebels. A bloody mouth suddenly appeared in front of Arthur, with white teeth filled with the flesh and bones of various creatures. The huge tonsils hung in mid-air like a shaking pendulum. But what can you do if you see through it? Praying for happiness from the devil is already foolish enough. Just do it for me obediently, maybe you still have a chance to change your destiny. Arthur frowned slightly and raised his hand to cover his nose in disgust. Agares, you should go see a doctor. This level of bad breath cannot be explained by a small cold, he said. Our contract is clearly written, Arthur Hastings, your soul has long belonged to me. If it can't fill my stomach, I'll have to use you as a companion. What did you just call me? Arthur Hastings, Agares laughed arrogantly, aren't you scared out of your wits and forgot your own name? Arthur pursed his lips and asked helplessly, who on earth told you that I call this name? Agares felt a hint of unease in his heart. Don't you call that name? It's impossible. Arthur first rolled his eyes, then gestured towards Agares with his middle finger. I have told you many times, my name is Young Fan. As for the Arthur Hastings you mentioned, I also really want to know where he has gone. If you can find his soul, then before you eat him, please make sure to summon him for me to ask. Also, if you don't have the ability to make me rich and prosperous, please move away from me immediately. The little roundworm in your stomach is going to go to work. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. New Opportunities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. New Opportunities. In the 19th century, London was still at the junction of light and darkness. The dawn sun has risen, but the sunlight shines on the pitch-black surface of the Thames River without bringing any light. The white mist almost engulfs the entire river, and only faint red lights can be seen from small boats parked near various docks. The city ahead is lined with chimneys. Although it's still early, they can't wait to spew out thick smoke with a foul odor, freely splashing its proud toxic air, blocking the already scarce sunlight and making the already gloomy weather even more oppressive. Hangover drunkards, homeless farmers, and workers wandering around due to unemployment can be seen everywhere on the narrow streets of both sides. They breathe heavily in the polluted and poisoned air, and their unhealthy waxy yellow skin color indicates their poor health condition. In the shadows of the streets and alleys, the pickpockets with their eyes flickering with thief lights also began to search for their new targets. The singing prostitutes stood in front of their rented houses filled with garbage and sewage, soliciting customers. Due to the recent economic downturn, they had to extend their business hours and hoped to exchange it for some bread and sugar. Arthur, who was dressed neatly, looked out of place compared to them, and the glare and scolding he received along the way also showed the image of the newly established Greater London Police Department in the eyes of these poor people. In the chaotic, noisy, and dirty East End of London, people usually prefer to use another term to refer to people like Arthur. They called him the peeler, and they felt that the London police were like an apple peeler, gradually peeling off their already meager skin, disrupting their business, interfering in their lives, and squeezing their living space. If it were just when he joined, Arthur might still have some reaction to their insults. But more than half a year has passed, and now he just feels numb. Not far ahead, two drunkards in tattered clothes were tangled up. As a skilled police officer, Arthur has long been adept at handling this situation. If you want to reason with drunkards, it's best to give them a stick to sober them up first. This principle may sound simple, but it's a valuable experience that Arthur and his colleagues only realized after being attacked by drunkards multiple times. Without hesitation, Arthur pulled out his civilized cane from his waist and gave one of them a stick on the head. Arthur roared, "If you two bastards don't want to be thrown into prison, it's best to stop me immediately." The two drunkards were beaten up and immediately became furious. They rolled up their sleeves in an attempt to teach Arthur a lesson, but before they could turn around, Arthur's police knife had already hit their throats. "I'll repeat it again, if you two don't want to cause trouble, it's best to get out of here right away." The cold touch of the police officer's knife immediately woke the drunkards up. A drunkard raised his hand to wipe the blood from his nose and apologized repeatedly to Arthur. "This is just a small fight between friends. We come from Salford, Manchester, and our people there are all so friendly. It's not worth your making a move." The other drunkard, who had half of his teeth knocked out, echoed in unison, "No, that's right, officer. We didn't intend to cause any trouble, we're leaving now." After speaking, the two of them quickly picked up the felt hats that had been thrown on the ground, supported each other, and left swaying and swaying. Arthur had just finished cleaning up these two drunkards when he saw many street vendors pushing fried fish carts and carrying woven bags selling food on the street corner. They also discovered Arthur in uniform, but everyone's choices were not the same. A small portion of them choose to leave this area wisely, while the vast majority would rather die than give up on this heavily populated street. At present, it is the best time for the sun to rise and sell breakfast. If they leave now, it means they will lose more than half of their daily income, which is a weight that their lives cannot bear. So even when facing Officer Arthur, who was well equipped and had just shown great power, they had no intention of giving way. Agares's illusory figure circled around Arthur, and he burst into a wicked and unrestrained laughter, saying, "Arthur, look at their eyes. They are fierce and vicious, and they can't help but drown you in the cold and foul-smelling River Thames. In their eyes, perhaps you are more like a devil than I am. Yeah. Perhaps in the past 6 months or so, I have lived more like a devil than you. The street vendors think I am a lackey of the authorities, and the authorities suspect that I may have Jacobin tendencies. Jacobin supporters believe that I am sent to monitor them, while the military and police who truly monitor them think that I will give them a tip. The security judge thinks that I am colluding with criminals, but the criminals think that I want to put them all on the gallows. This world is really absurd." Arthur took off his dome hat and looked at the coat of arms of the Greater London Police Department. He murmured, "Agares, I've been thinking maybe it's time for a different way of life." Agares's eyes lit up upon hearing this, and he even spoke in a rarely used cheesy voice to console himself, "Oh, my dear Arthur, you finally figured it out. If you had worked with me earlier, maybe you would have become Prime Minister by now. If you were against you, you would have killed anyone and sent them all into my stomach, just like you did to Professor Demps. Let's start planning our next goal. How about starting with that sheriff who is always making things difficult for you?" "I sincerely appreciate your kind help," Arthur said, "but that's not what I meant by changing the way of life." "Isn't that what you mean?" Agares exclaimed in surprise, "So what do you mean?" Arthur did not answer his question, but waved his hat and shouted loudly at a windbreaker man in front of him who was bargaining with a vendor, "Elder, this way." ELD heard Arthur's shout and had to complain to the vendor for a while before quickly running to Arthur's side. "Oh, Arthur. The weather is not good today, and my mood is also in a mess, but seeing you makes me feel much better." Arthur asked, "What were you arguing with the vendor just now?" Upon hearing these words, Elder couldn't help but burst out in foul language. "Arthur, you don't know how rude that bastard is. 3 of the 4 oysters he sold me are already smelly, but he wants to take me 4 pence. This is simply robbery. If you hadn't called me, I would have had a fight with him." Arthur said calmly, "ELD, if you really fight him, it will be difficult for me to do. I just taught 2 drunken fighters a lesson. Anyway, when I fight, you just need to avoid it a bit." Eld took out a pipe from his pocket and held it in his mouth. He then filled the iron box containing tobacco from his chest and lit it with a match. He took a strong sip and spit out a cigarette ring, which made him feel more comfortable. Eld asked, "Let's not talk about that anymore. A few days ago, I asked you something. How are you thinking about it? Instead of staying in this trash can, why not board the ship with me? We are in need of a knowledgeable and talented naturalist like you to travel the world with me. Life is easy and enjoyable, and my salary can double. Maybe I can even meet a few foreign ladies. Why not?" He took out another pipe from his pocket, filled it with tobacco, and without asking Arthur if he wanted it, he stuffed it into the other person's mouth and even set fire to it on his own. Elder was busy with his hands and not idle with his mouth, he kept persuading. "Arthur, you need to think about this issue carefully. Continuing to work at the Greater London Police Department doesn't have much future. I heard that most of the police recruited there are unemployed textile workers or farmers from the northeast, and even Irish people can get in. Although we graduates from the University of London are not recognized, it is all because the villains of Oxford and Cambridge collude with the archbishops of various dioceses behind the scenes. If it comes to knowledge, we are much better than them. However, outstanding individuals like us are unable to receive degree certificates simply because schools allow non-Anglican believers to enroll. Is there anything worse than this in the world?" Arthur took a sip on his pipe and said, "Of course there is." "For example, what?" "For example, I know a guy from a wealthy and prominent family. He believes in the Chinese religion and has an uncle who holds a high position as a rear admiral in the Royal Navy, but he insists on coming to study at the University of London. He says he wants to make a living on his own, but eventually he has to rely on his uncle's connections to make a living on the ship." Eld laughed heartily at the words and punched Arthur on the shoulder, saying, "Arthur, what you're saying is so harsh. I used to have a hard time understanding it, but now I have. Everyone is swimming in a poop, and if you feel like you can't see poop, it's not because the environment is good, but because you've already gone in." Arthur fell silent upon hearing this. Eld asked, "Arthur, why aren't you talking?" "Eld, it's really hard for me to imagine." "What's wrong?" Arthur sighed and said, "You actually graduated from classical literature." Eld laughed heartily and said, "It all boils down to your lack of understanding of classical literature. Nero once said, 'No man or woman has a chaste body, but most people cleverly conceal their ugliness.' Although he is a son of a bitch, that statement is not wrong. Because for writers, no one, regardless of gender, has a clean mouth, and most of them are even too lazy to conceal it. And I also eagerly hope to become a part of them. Stop talking about this, what have you really considered? Will you come to our ship?" Arthur nodded and said, "This time I've accepted your favor. I'm almost tired of my current job. Changing jobs will benefit me and the world." Upon hearing these words, Agares, who was originally bored and wandering around, suddenly became enraged. He somehow transformed a pitchfork and placed it against Arthur's back, roaring, "Arthur! But it's not good for me. I'm the devil, the devil. Do you plan to let me accompany you on the sea to watch whales mate for the next few years?" Eld obviously couldn't hear Agar's complaint, and he was pleasantly surprised. "So, are you agreeing?" Arthur nodded and said, "I can't think of a reason to refuse." "Great. Let's make a deal then." Eld whistled happily, "You will definitely do better than that guy who graduated from Cambridge." "The guy who graduated from Cambridge?" Arthur asked, "Do you have any other candidates?" "He's not really another candidate, he was supposed to be on board as a pastor. But if we can't find a suitable naturalist, the captain said that guy can also fill the gap. After all, that guy had studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh for a few years before going to Cambridge to study theology." Arthur asked again, "When do you plan to set sail?" Eld said, "This has to take into account the direction of the monsoon. If the Navy is urging us urgently, we will depart in September. If they are not in a hurry, we will have to wait until winter. However, you don't have to worry about the salary issue from April to the time before departure. As long as you confirm your employment, even if you are on shore, you can still receive half of your usual salary, which is still much higher than what you received at the Metropolitan Police Department in Greater London." Arthur self-deprecatingly said, "Of course I'm not worried about the salary issue, even the skilled workers in the factory earn more than me. But I still don't understand why the Royal Navy is organizing a global scientific expedition. From what I've learned, the masters of the Navy Department don't seem to be brave enough to dedicate themselves to science." Eld waved his hand indifferently and said, "Scientific investigation. Of course, that's to take it out and fool people. The Navy Department doesn't care about any scientific research investigations. Our main orders are to survey, measure and draw important nautical charts of South America, investigate and understand the sea conditions and political forces near the Pacific and Indian Islands, and provide intelligence support for future Royal Navy fleets entering and exiting this area. But due to the rebellious people in the North American colonies adhering to the Monroe Doctrine policy and refusing to allow Great Britain and other European countries to intervene in American affairs, we can only label ourselves as scientific explorers to ensure that there will be no conflict with them. After all, we didn't get any benefits from our 2 independence wars with them, so it's necessary to maintain harmony by pretending to be in public. In summary, the position of naturalist would be best if one could produce some scientific research results, and it would be harmless if one could not. Apart from enduring rough waves and the narrow cabin of the Beagle, there is nothing else bad about it. Arthur, you are my best friend. Even if I cheat my uncle, I can't cheat you." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Piercing Scotland Yard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Piercing Scotland Yard. After parting ways with Elder, Arthur walked slowly along the usual patrol path towards the Scottish field. He turned a blind eye to the vendors operating on both sides of the road, and only when the shop owners strongly protested would he reluctantly politely persuade the vendors to leave. This is the philosophy of life that Arthur learned only after working in Scotland for 6 months. The security area under the responsibility of the Greater London Police Department has a population of 1.5 million, which is the largest in the world, and 1/10 of these 1.5 million people directly or indirectly engage in mobile retail operations. The prisons near London have long been overcrowded, so Arthur cannot put everyone in jail. Even though the Royal Navy's ships were able to sail across the seas and defeat the invincible fleets of the Dutch and Spanish, causing Napoleon's fleet to suffer a crushing defeat in the Battle of Trafalgar, the Royal Navy also lacked the ability to exile all London vendors to Australia. Whether to catch or not, Arthur will always face this difficult decision in the past 6 months. Fortunately, from now on, he no longer has to face this dilemma. Agares hung his head down like a defeated rooster, and he followed closely behind Arthur, unable to muster any energy. Arthur also noticed that his friend was not feeling well, so he asked, "Agares, what's wrong with you? Look at your stinky face, it looks like a defeated Frenchman." "Arthur, you're going to let me accompany you to the sea to see whales? What kind of expression are you planning on having me make? Do you want me to laugh?" After Agares finished speaking, he ran to a fish stall and squatted down. With a disdainful expression, he looked at the half-dead herring spitting bubbles on the table, then covered his forehead and sighed. "How many virtues have I accumulated to fall into this situation? In the next few years, will I have to rely on this ugly and sticky little thing to feed?" Arthur's complaint towards Agares not only lacked any sympathy, but also wanted to strongly correct the devil's erroneous values. "Agares, what you say is disrespectful of the history of this country. For a long time in the past, the Royal Navy relied on the ugly little thing you described to make a living. In order to promote mercantilist policies and encourage the development of fishing and shipbuilding, Henry VII issued the Fish Eating Act, which mandated that fish must be eaten every year during Lent and Lent. During the reign of Elizabeth I, the scope of Fish Eating Day was expanded to 3 days a week. Eating fish is the responsibility and obligation of every king's subjects under his rule. Agares was furious, and he somehow conjured up 3 torches, jumping his feet while performing colorful ball acrobatics similar to a circus clown to provoke Arthur. "Using the laws of Britain to slay the Duke of Hell, Arthur, you have great authority. I just don't want to eat, what can you do with me?" Arthur shrugged and said, "According to the law, if you don't eat according to the rules on Fish Day, the lightest punishment is 6 hours of imprisonment. However, your attitude is extremely serious, so I advocate a 10-day imprisonment. However, that's all in the past. Now whether you like to eat or not, no one cares about you. No one cares about me. So why are you bringing this up?" Arthur answered seriously, "Because you just called me an excellent graduate of the University of London this morning, I plan to show you my excellent academic literacy. Although this thing usually doesn't come in handy in the daily work of the Greater London Police Department, in order not to disappoint you as your main sponsor, I think I need to give you some explanation to some extent." "I don't need you to give me this kind of explanation. If you really want to give me an explanation, then use your clever little brain to think of other ways besides floating on the sea. Unfortunately, Agares, everything is too late. If you had honestly sent me to Oxford or Cambridge to study, or if I had not encountered an economic downturn when I graduated, perhaps I had other options. But now, I have only one way to go to the sea. Agares, this is all your fault." "Oh. My dear Arthur," Agares pleaded in a low voice, "if I apologize now, will it be too late?" Arthur pointed to the badge on his hat and asked, "If an apology works, what else do the police have to do?" "Damn it. So you're being determined. Since that's the case, why don't you take off your disgusting clothes? Didn't all your salary for this week already be paid?" Arthur said, "This is called shenshur shenjong. Stand firm on the last post. As long as I haven't officially submitted my resignation, I will still be a member of the Metropolitan Police Force in London. Oh, Arthur. Agares picked up his handkerchief and pretended to wipe away his tears. I almost believed your lies. What are you, this heinous little bastard, planning to do? Arthur glanced at him and said, I've been disgusted by this place for half a year. Did I just walk away so lightly? Oh. That's right. The devil showed an excited smile. What are you planning to do? Burn down the Scottish field or stab your damn boss with a knife? None of them are. So what are you planning to do? I plan to stab through the Scottish field and add fire to my boss's butt. Isn't it all the same? No, Agares, you don't understand, it's completely different. Arthur suddenly stopped and stood at the endless pedestrian intersection. Behind him was the noisy, dirty East End of London, filled with a stench of decay. But the world in front of him had completely changed its appearance. A neat array of houses and clean streets, with Gothic spires, magnificent medieval architecture, and intricately designed modern houses, complement each other with magnificent reliefs and eerie pitch-black fences. The vicinity of Parliament Square is filled with ornate horse-drawn carriages and well-dressed upper-class gentlemen and ladies. Less than 3 miles away, the whole essence of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland is condensed. To the east is the London Parliament Building, which represents the national legislature. To the north is Whitehall Street, which is full of administrative institutions. To the west is the Supreme Court of Great Britain, and to the south are Westminster Abbey and St. Margaret's Church, which symbolize the Anglican Church. All of this contrasts sharply with the dark and filthy scene behind, making it dazzling. And Arthur's destination today is also located here. His gaze drifted north through the dense crowd. 4. Whitehall Street. Metropolitan Police Headquarters, London. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. What is hell? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. What is hell? Before Arthur could enter the main entrance of the police headquarters, a colleague who was also wearing a police uniform and holding a thick stack of documents stopped him first. The other party saw Arthur's face and raised their hand to wipe the sweat off their forehead, looking as if they had been granted amnesty. Thank goodness, Arthur, you've finally arrived. If you're late, I don't have the ability to deal with those difficult juries and high-ranking magistrates. Hurry up, time is running out, let's talk as we walk. Arthur was pushed forward by him and spoke casually. Tony, you just lack some necessary confidence. The magistrate's court is not something scary. All you need to do is read out the prosecution materials in your hand to everyone. You don't know how to read, what's there to worry about? Tony was disheartened and said, Arthur, you don't know that before taking on this job, I was just a cobbler repairing shoes for others. If it weren't for the fact that many people in our area were already poor and without shoes, I might never have come to London in my lifetime. Although I can recognize 2 words, it's just about recognizing words. The highest education I have received is the Sunday school I attended when I was a child, and the only complete book I have read is the Bible. How can a lowly person like me compare to a high-achieving student like you who has received a serious college education? Tony, you're already better than many pastors. At least you've read the Bible in its entirety, Arthur comforted with a kind voice. You're joking with me again, Tony asked. By the way, let me ask you something. Is the tuition fee for the University of London that you attended expensive? Arthur raised his eyebrows and said, Do you want to continue your studies? Tony blushed and waved his hand repeatedly. I dare not have such noble thoughts. So why are you asking this? Tony held it for a while before finally making up his mind to reveal the truth. I'll probably be like this in my life. But my child can't be like me. I've been wrestling in this mud pit for so many years, not just to make him suffer with me. He must go to school, not only to school, but also to college. Although he's not yet in his prime, I must first help him prepare the money for school. Do you think that's the truth? Upon hearing this, Arthur patted Tony's shoulder with admiration and said, "Tony, I didn't expect you to be such a responsible father. It would be great if you could show such courage while on duty." Upon hearing this, Tony's already flushed face was scorching hot. "Arthur, last time I didn't mean to leave you alone in the alley. Those people were holding hammers and knives, and even if I stayed, I wouldn't be of any use. The reason why I ran away was to go back and call for reinforcements for you. It's okay, I've forgiven you already." Arthur patted the police officer's knife on his waist. "At least since that time, the boss has been willing to give us some decent weapons. But by the way, Arthur, how did you get out of it that time?" Arthur glanced at Agares, who was sulking beside him, and said, "Don't worry about it. I always have my way. Next time you encounter something like this, should you run or not? You are already a father, don't joke about your family." Tony was so ashamed that he couldn't help but smile and said, "Actually, I'm still far from being a father. I just planned to get married recently. I've already submitted my marriage application, and as long as it's approved, I can officially get married." Arthur couldn't help but frown and said, "What the hell are they up to? Why do police officers have to approve marriages? No drinking, no beards, no gambling, no debt, no bad habits, no disheveled clothes, no indecent behavior, and even no mentally ill individuals in the family. For individual police officers, they should have appropriate religious beliefs, possess certain cultural qualities, strictly prohibit private business, and strictly prohibit keeping poultry or even pets. In any public place, even after work hours, one should consciously participate and bravely maintain public order, and shoulder all the responsibilities of maintaining social moral norms. Even more ridiculous is that they are only willing to offer a price of 12 shillings per week for such people. That's all for now. They're starting to focus on getting married, why don't they just send us a wife? So they can monitor me 24 hours a day." Tony agreed with empathy when he heard Arthur suffer a lot and said, "All right, Arthur, your wife can't monitor you for 24 hours. Have you forgotten? We have to be on duty for 14 hours every day, and if we're not lucky, we'll have to be scolded for another hour or two. As for your wife, she can monitor you for an average of 8 hours a day, which would be good." Tony sighed helplessly as he spoke, but it's no use complaining about these things. "By the way, you haven't told me how much tuition fees are at the University of London yet." Arthur breathed a sigh of relief and replied, £23 and 6 shillings per academic year. Hiss. Tony took a cold breath and said, "This is really expensive. I only earn over £30 a year, and I have to spend most of it to support my child's education. It seems like I need to save money earlier. This is already very cheap. You probably haven't inquired about the tuition fees of the 4 major law firms in London. How much does it charge there?" Arthur raised 3 fingers at him and said, "This number is 1 year. £30. Tony furrowed his brows and gritted his teeth. "My salary should increase again. With hard work, maybe I can squeeze him out." Lawyer. Little Tony's lawyer. This is a good profession, definitely much stronger than his father. Just as Tony was lost in endless imagination, Arthur poured him a bucket of cold water. £30. Tony, what are you thinking? It's £300. Tony felt a whirlwind when he heard this number and said, "They just took my life. I may never be able to save up for his tuition in this lifetime. It's nothing if we can't save it up. That place is not meant for ordinary citizens like us. Most of the people studying inside are bankers, factory owners, or children of nobles. Don't they usually go to Oxford or Cambridge?" "Well, that's true. But there's always someone who wants a change, isn't there? It's like when you're used to potatoes and occasionally want to make some bread to mix with oil residue. Just for a change of taste, it would cost an extra £300 a year." Tony looked at the grey sky, feeling only that his future was gloomy. "Arthur, why are you telling me these things? If I didn't know, I might still feel a little better off." Now I feel like I can't go on living happily. Arthur, if you do this, you will go to hell. Hell. Arthur smiled faintly. Tony, although I'm sorry to say that, you and I are already here. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Difficult cases. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Difficult cases. The magistrate's court was located not far from Scotland Yard, so Arthur and his team arrived on foot shortly after. But at this moment, Tony had no intention of working and was worried about his future days. But he is not the most anxious one among everyone present. A tense-looking police officer was standing slowly pacing in front of the security court, his eyebrows tightly clenched together. Even though he was far away, Arthur could still clearly see the beads of sweat on his temples. Arthur raised his hand and greeted him. Tom, are you responsible for escorting the suspect today? Officer Tom was almost moved to tears when he saw Arthur's familiar face. Arthur, you must help me. Arthur turned his head to look at Tony, who was feeling lost behind him, and turned to ask Tom, what's wrong? Are your children going to college too? Going to college? No, my wife just got pregnant and it's hard to say if she can give birth smoothly. Have you encountered any difficulties? Not yet. However, I had miscarriages twice before. You must save me this time. Arthur shrugged and spread out his hand at him. Tom, you must be in a hurry. I'm just a police officer like you, and I'm in charge of crime, not childbirth. If you want to help your wife give birth smoothly, you should give her more nutrition and find an experienced midwife. But neither of the above is within my scope of work. Tom's anxious palms were covered in sweat, and he spoke up, I have already contacted the midwife. Although I am not wealthy, I have tried my best to allocate a portion of my small salary every day to buy meat for her. Although everything seems to be going smoothly now, my wife dreamed of God last night. God said, the reason she had a miscarriage is because as a husband, I have too many sins in my hands. I must go to redeem myself, otherwise this time I will also be stillborn. Atonement. Isn't that the pastor's job? The St. Margaret's Church is right behind me, you should go straight and then turn left. Tom covered his face and said incoherently, this time, I'm afraid the pastor won't be effective. Doesn't it work? Arthur pinched his chin and pondered for a moment, why don't you buy a ticket to the Ottoman Empire and ask an imam? Or go to the East and seek advice from a highly cultivated bald monk. Even if God doesn't consider the priest's face, at least he needs to take care of the emotions of Allah and Buddha. If they don't work, I know a red-nosed clown who knows magic, and I can ask him to help you take a look. Agares' phantom flickered and said, Arthur, I'm not a clown. Tom's eyes flickered with tears, and he was on the verge of collapse. Oh. Arthur, it's already this time, so don't make fun of me. There must be a reason why God chose to appear in my wife's dream at this time. I've been thinking it over and over again this morning, and no matter how I think about it, I think God must be talking about little Adam's case. The case of little Adam. Arthur's mind sank when he heard the name. Little Adam's fame can be described as thunderous in the ears of the patrol officers in this area. Although he is only a 9-year-old boy, little Adam's criminal record cannot be written on a single page. As an experienced thief, little Adam's business scope ranges from breaking into homes and stealing handkerchiefs, to taking fruits and snatching toys. However, due to the small amount involved in the case, his sentence is not too long. Therefore, he can be seen active on the streets of the Diocese of San Giros every once in a while, but soon he will be sent back to prison. Arthur took the archival materials from Tony's hand and quickly found the relevant information about little Adam. As he flipped through the relevant materials, he muttered, I've talked to that kid before, trying to make him a little more restrained. But it wasn't until I learned about his family situation that I realized it was impossible. Tony asked, why not? Isn't he afraid of going to jail or being whipped? Arthur closed his notebook and stared straight at Tony. Adam told me that prison is more comfortable than staying at his home. Because he can take a hot shower and get some clean clothes and socks when he goes in. Although sometimes bullied by other prisoners inside, prison guards and some conscientious criminals will intervene to stop it. And if he is outside, if he doesn't bring back the money from outside, then his damn parents will beat him much harder than the prisoners in prison. Tony, we are just police officers. We can solve some of the security issues, but Adam's criminal behavior is a social problem, and we are helpless about it later. Arthur spoke to Tom, who was repenting and praying on the side, and said, if you feel guilty about little Adam, then there's no need to do so. For him, if you put him in prison, you're doing good. God won't blame you for it. If you can arrange a better prison for him, God may even reward your kindness. But this time it's different, Arthur. Tom cried bitterly and said, he made a big mistake this time. I'm afraid he won't be able to close the case in prison. What's even worse is that he committed it in the hands of Sheriff Willows. He specifically warned me this morning that we must take this case to justice. Because the Ministry of Internal Affairs just issued a new document the day before yesterday, which stated that a low success rate in prosecutions would damage the social image of the Metropolitan Police Force in London, it is required that we strive towards a 100% success rate in prosecutions. You also know the personality of that old bastard Willox. If we mess up and smear his glorious honor book, he might be fired together. My wife is going to have a child soon, I can't lose this job. But I can't watch little Adam die either. To die. What crime did he commit this time? Did he kill or set fire? None of them, Tom said trembling, he just stole a lady's umbrella. Tony breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this and said, Tom, can you not be surprised when you speak? How much does an umbrella cost? The sheriff is likely to sentence him to 1 year in prison. You just need to arrange a good place for him, it's not a big deal. Tom trembled all over and said, no, Tony, that's a very delicate lace-edged sunshade, worth 7 shillings and 6 pence. 7 shillings and 6 pence. Tony exclaimed in shock, damn it. If it's more than 5 shillings, he'll have to go to the gallows. Even if the sheriff and jury are lenient, he'll have to be exiled to Australia for 7 or 8 years. A 9-year-old ghost, exiled to Australia. He's probably going to die on a ship before he gets anywhere. Tom gasped heavily and said, if it really doesn't work out. I might as well fight that old bastard from Sheriff Willows. This is God's will, I should be fine. Just as Tom was clenching his fists and planning to go all out to fight, Arthur's hand rested on his shoulder. That is a warm and sunny smile. Behind Arthur's smile, Agares also showed a satisfied smile. Oh. Arthur, I seem to have seen your blatant bad intentions. Arthur said, Tom, leave this matter to me. You can go back to duty. I promise you, little Adam will be fine. Tom looked surprised and said, did you come up with a win-win solution? Oh my goodness. I knew it. After all, the smartest brain in all Scotland is standing here. He clenched his fist and swung it fiercely towards the sky, saying, Arthur. Go show them, your 4 years of college are not for nothing. Oxford and Cambridge can't catch up with the value of a leg at the University of London. Arthur looked at excited Tom and calmly took off the blue and white armband from his left arm, handing it to Tom's hand. His deep voice was like a demon pondering. By the way, please say hello to Sheriff Willows and tell that uneducated bastard, the patrolman of Greenwich District of the London Metropolitan Police Force, Arthur Hastings, that he doesn't want to do it anymore. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. In the name of the devil. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. In the name of the devil. Because it was still early and not all the members of the jury had arrived, Arthur did not attend directly after entering the security court, but walked straight along the carpet. At the end of the corridor is a dimly lit stone staircase, which leads to a small waiting room for temporary detention of prisoners. The law enforcement officer responsible for guarding the prisoners was already familiar with Arthur, and he greeted him as usual. "Oh, isn't this Arthur? Are you representing Scotland in court today? They might as well send you to the permanent court. Why bother asking you to come back every time there are prisoners?" Arthur nodded with a smile and said, "I don't want to take on this job either. But there's nothing I can do. The team is short of manpower, and one person has to be split into two pieces. As you know, our turnover rate and layoff rate are both high. Only 1/3 of the new hires I joined at the same time last year are left now." The legal officer also sighed and said, "It's not easy for big guys to get by. Why, are you here to bring the criminals up for trial temporarily? Who are you looking for?" "A child named Adam Evans. We didn't ask clearly about some situations before, so we need to double-check. How careful the work is, buddy. Let me take a look, Adam Evans. He's in room 4, do you need to lead the way? I've been here so many times, even if I were a donkey, I should have memorized my location." The law enforcement officer burst into laughter upon hearing the words. He removed the fist-sized keychain from the hook on the wall and threw it to Arthur with a flick of his hand. "Then please do as you please." Arthur picked up the keychain and arrived at the 4th waiting room, familiar with the situation. He inserted the key and opened the heavy iron door, and a dazzling light shot through the gap in the pitch-black railing of the skylight. Under the illumination of the light, dust could be clearly seen flying in the sky. In this narrow and cramped waiting room, which is less than half a meter long, there is only one wooden board fixed with iron chains serving as a seat. Little Adam, wearing a faded coarse cloth top, sat quietly against the corner of the wooden board. His two little hands tightly grasped the cold iron chain, and his thin and weak body leaned against the mossy wall tiles, seemingly hoping to make himself sit more securely. He heard the sound of the iron door opening, his bewildered eyes perfectly aligned with Arthur's face. "Mr. Hastings." Arthur casually closed the iron door and put a finger in the middle of his lips, saying, "Shoo, keep it down, just call me Arthur." Adam couldn't help but become excited, his small face flushed, and even though he deliberately lowered his voice, it was still easy to detect the joy in his tone. "It's really you. It seems like the trial of me is about to begin, right? I can go to prison again and live for free." Arthur looked at Adam's innocent little face, ready to tell him the truth. But before he could speak, Agares's figure reappeared. Unfortunately, due to the narrow space in the waiting room, Agares's entire face could only fit into the gaps in the iron window railing. The Red Devil held onto the edge of the iron railing with both hands, pulling his head out forcefully while shouting loudly. "Damn it! What the hell is this place? Our prison in hell is even more spacious than here. Arthur, can't you go somewhere that people should go?" Arthur selectively ignored Agares' complaint and spoke to Adam, "Do you know how much trouble you've caused this time?" "Of course I know." Adam jumped off the wooden board and proudly patted his chest, saying, "I saw at a glance that the umbrella was worth a lot, otherwise I wouldn't have stolen it. This time, I will definitely be sentenced to 10 or 8 years. When I come out of prison, I will be a young and strong young man. When I go to work in the factory again, the unscrupulous factory owner won't want to pay me only half of my salary, and I will also take the price of an adult." Arthur's heart sank and he touched Adam's head. "I'm glad you went to jail with such noble goals. But Adam, I have to tell you bad news. This time, you may be sentenced to death. Death penalty." Little Adam, who was still full of joy just now, was so scared by this word that his face turned pale. His lips trembled and he asked, "Sir, aren't you really scaring me?" Arthur said seriously, "I rarely scare others, nor do I scare children. And with our friendship, do you think I would lie to you?" Little Adam remained silent for a while before slowly speaking up, "Most of the police are bad people. They hit me on the head with sticks and called me a little jerk, a little villain. That sheriff with a hooked nose would even kick my butt when he saw me. But you, and Officer Tom, you two are good people. You have given me a shilling to speak with me. Officer Tom took me to his house for dinner, and Officer Tom's wife was also a very kind person. She repaired my torn pants for me. By the way, she even took me home, but I didn't blame her for that. Because she didn't know that my parents didn't want to see me at home. Arthur finally understood what was going on in Mrs. Tom's dream upon hearing this. Perhaps she simply wanted to save little Adam, or perhaps she wanted to accumulate some good karma for her unborn child. What she didn't expect was that her kindness almost drove her husband crazy. Little Adam saw Arthur not speaking for a long time, so he cautiously asked, "Sir, if I don't want to die, what should I do now?" Arthur began to feel scared when he saw him, and his suspended heart also let go halfway. He comforted, "As long as you listen to me, everything will be fine. Remember, when the trial starts later, you must first greet the judges and the ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Although I will do my best to defend you, the final decision is not in my hands, and the outcome of the judgment will likely depend on their perception of you. So you must leave them a good first impression, which is crucial for the final verdict." Little Adam nodded lightly and said, "What else do I need to do besides these? If the sheriff says something very outrageous to you, do not refute, do not talk back, and do not lose your temper just because you have been wronged. You must sincerely admit your mistake and show a good attitude of confession. Besides, don't say anything. If the judge asks you a question and asks you to answer it, you only need to repeat your confession and paraphrase what I said. If I could squeeze out a few tears, that would be even better. I just received today's jury list, which includes many married women who treat you like their own children. So the sadder you cry in court, the farther your neck will be from the gallows." Adam blinked his eyes as if rehearsing a crying scene. But he worked hard for a long time, but couldn't squeeze a tear out. He replied with a mournful face, "But sir, I really can't cry for an umbrella." "Then think about your parents." Arthur took a deep breath and said, "Adam, think about how your parents hit you." As soon as Arthur finished speaking, Adam began to sob softly. His tears were like broken beads dripping on the damp floor of the waiting room, and the sound he made caught the attention of the law enforcement officers. "Arthur, what's going on?" Arthur quickly covered Adam's mouth. He looked at his face seriously, and repeatedly reminded him. "Adam, I know you're feeling bad, and I'm feeling bad too. But in order for your neck to not be hung on a hinge, you must hold back your tears now. This thing is even more precious than gold now, and you can't use it up immediately." Adam's eyes turned slightly red, and he suddenly took a sniff. His throat was dry and astringent, unable to speak normally, but he still nodded firmly at Arthur. Arthur could only give a heavy hug to Adam's trust. His deep black eyes flickered with a slight red light, which was Agares smiling. His mother, "Adam, you must be worthy of me, of Tom, of Mrs. Tom, of those of us who still care about you. You must behave well. As for the rest, it's up to me. I, Arthur Hastings, in the name of the devil, I will surely bring you back from the magistrate's court alive." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Agares' Trick. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Agares' Trick. Silence. Dong. As the hammer fell, the noisy security court fell into silence. The magistrate, wearing a silver wig and a black cloak, began leading the jury members to recite the oath after confirming their attendance. "I swear that as a citizen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland with good reputation, I will participate in trial activities in accordance with the law, faithfully fulfill my duties as a jury, based on common sense and moral standards, and on public morality and conscience, independently and indisputably make fair judgments on the results of cases, and maintain a good social order and environment." After the oath was announced, the magistrate spoke to the slightly nervous jurors. "Ladies and gentlemen, many of you may have appeared here for the first time and have not learned any relevant legal knowledge. But that's okay, because your responsibilities don't require those things. You only need a fair and selfless heart. All jurors are randomly selected from a wide range of London citizens based on selection criteria, with no criminal record, good reputation, and normal values. Therefore, you only need to make a judgment on the defendant's guilt or innocence based on your social experience and moral values, and the evidence you have learned in court. And I must also make a fair and reasonable request to you, that is, you can only consider the evidence presented in court, not specific legal provisions. I will guide and answer any doubts about legal provisions to you. Now, do you understand? As the magistrate said, a jury composed of 12 people has a complex composition, with vastly different professions and educational backgrounds. Among them are small employees of trading companies, skilled technicians in factories, surgeons, housewives, and so on. Most of them are first-time participants in court judgments, and in a solemn and quiet environment, they inevitably appear cramped and nervous. A waist-tied woman wearing a fashionable feather hat and a ruffled skirt extended her black-gloved hands and pressed them slightly on her abdomen, greeting the judge. I am honored to have been selected as the spokesperson for the jury. We have heard your words clearly, Mr. Judge. The judge also smiled and responded, "Nice to see you here, Mrs. Peel. To be honest, when I saw your name appear on the jury list, it really scared me." Arthur, who was originally organizing documents in the prosecution seat, suddenly frowned when he heard these words. "Madam." He is very confident that he did not hear the judge's words correctly, and the other party used the word lady. This indicates that the woman who just spoke either came from a noble background or married a noble. Arthur's speed of organizing documents gradually slowed down, and his mind gradually became lively. Just as he was pondering how to exploit this unexpected factor, his spare light caught a glimpse of Agares sitting on top of the head of the sheriff. The Red Devil also noticed the distinguished lady. He stepped on the head and shoulders of the sheriff and jumped onto the prosecution seat in front of Arthur, pointing at the lady and grinning. "Arthur, as long as you get the soul of that lady, I'll forget about your trip to the sea to see whales." Arthur replied calmly while the sheriff was chatting with the Pilf people. "Either you are envious of female college student Eliza, or you are concerned about a married lady. Agares, your taste has changed too quickly. Oh, 10 Elizabeths are not worth such a lady. Arthur, you're still young and don't understand the benefits." Arthur replied solemnly, "Agares, you'd better speak more clearly. You're talking like this, and I want to sue you." The Red Devil's saliva dripped on Arthur's lawsuit documents. "She exudes a strong aura of power from all over her body. Taking a bite can satisfy me for half a year, which is not comparable to a little girl like Eliza who is full of green skin. You love power so much, why didn't you choose a prominent contract maker back then? I, a poor kid, have no ability to fill your deep-seated desires." "Humph. I've looked for it before. When I followed King Solomon into Jerusalem, your ancestors didn't even know where to live." "My ancestors. They should have already completed the Second Eastern Expedition by then." "The Second Crusade. Are you referring to the Crusades?" "Arthur, where did all the historical knowledge you learned in college go? The Second Crusade is already in the 12th century." Arthur knew he was talking to him like a duck, so he was not interested in continuing the conversation. Instead, he asked, "You still haven't answered me, why did you come to me to sign a contract? There are plenty of fraudsters and robbers in London, why do you look up to me so much?" Agares angrily said, "Why bother asking? Do you think it's easy to find someone without a religious belief in London these days? Even if it is found, it is probably an uneducated, unsophisticated, untraceable, immoral, uncivilized, timid, irritable, and his mother stupid person. Arthur, don't doubt your strength. You have been carefully selected by me." Arthur scratched his face and said, "For a moment, I really don't know if you're praising me or cursing me." "Well, let's not mention this one for now. Agares, do me a favor." "Can I do you a favor?" Agares stared in his left eye, one big and one small. "Arthur, what do you think I am? A torn rag. After peeing, you know how to dry the urine stains on the ground with me. When you don't use it, you don't even bother to help me wash them. I know your power, and since you can amplify the hidden desires in others' hearts, you must also be able to amplify Mrs. Peel's empathy and mother's instinct for me. Arthur, I haven't promised you yet. Time is running out, Agares, you are my partner. Why didn't you say it when you promised to go see whales on the ship this morning? Dong! The hammer struck heavily in front of the case. The magistrate solemnly declared, I now announce that the London District Magistrates' Court is officially hearing the case of Adam Evans' theft. Please read the prosecution documents and submit relevant evidence. Arthur restrained his face and solemnly read out the document in his hand. Arthur Hastings, the Greenwich District Patrol Officer of the Metropolitan Police Force, hereby represents the Metropolitan Police Department in formally prosecuting the defendant Adam Evans. The defendant Adam Evans, 9 years old, male, resides at 27, Church Lane, St. Giles Diocese, London. At around 3 p.m. on March 25, victim Nancy Lewis participated in a local legislative campaign speech in Greenwich District. The election campaign ended around 4:30 p.m., and on her way home, Ms. Nancy discovered a stolen umbrella she was carrying with her. She immediately went to the nearby police station to seek help. Agares saw Arthur reading the indictment with a righteous expression and spat heavily on the ground. His mother, don't you ask around. Whether it's King Solomon, Short Pippin, White Shirt Havdan, or William the Conqueror, which of them dare treat me like this? He glanced at Mrs. Peel sitting beside him and suddenly noticed a middle-aged man wearing a black top hat sitting in the corner of the auditorium. Oh! How did I miss this one? Agares rolled his eyes and chuckled twice. He rubbed his evil little finger and murmured softly. Arthur, just show me. After this trial is over, I want to see how you're still going to the sea. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Suspected Seeds. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Suspected Seeds. After receiving the call from the Greenwich branch of the Greater London Police Department, Sheriff Willows immediately led a patrol team to search along the road near the campaign speech venue. Finally, the patrol team found suspect Adam Evans with stolen goods ready to abscond in an alley not far from the venue at 5:03 p.m. He confessed to his crimes and voluntarily accepted arrest by the patrol team. Taking into account Adam Evans's performance and modus operandi at the time of the incident, the Greater London Police Department ultimately decided to prosecute him on the grounds of theft. And due to the suspect's previous criminal record of multiple thefts, the crime is serious, and the difference between his last release from prison and the time of this crime is very short, indicating that the suspect has no remorse in his heart. Therefore, after comprehensive internal discussions, the Greater London Police Department suggests that the court impose severe punishments in order to deter criminals in Greater London and rectify social norms. Arthur breathed a soft sigh as he read this. Although he also wanted to tamper with the indictment, he found out that the case was too late and the indictment had already been submitted to the court. If the content of the indictment is changed temporarily, it will inevitably arouse the suspicion of the security judge. Once the judge has the impression that the police have been bribed by the criminals, not to mention that little Adam was acquitted, it is feared that the judge will really impose severe punishment. Everyone knows that the magistrates are holding back a strong desire to renovate the newly established Scotland Yard. Many old-fashioned judges with rigid thinking believe that the establishment of the Scottish court was completely taken from their hands. In the past, they had the power to command their police officers to arrest criminals, but the emergence of professional police forces led to the disappearance of local police officers and made them a thorough judge. As expected, the magistrate listened to Arthur's case statement and carefully checked the prosecution documents before him until it was confirmed that there were no errors before nodding slightly. Submit evidence. The sun umbrella, which had already been prepared, was trembling on the evidence stand in the center of the court by Officer Tom, who was sweating profusely and wearing white gloves. The judge asked, "What's wrong with you?" Tom was afraid that the judge would see that he was feeling guilty, so he covered his stomach and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Judge. I'm feeling a bit unwell." Maybe I sweated too much during the patrol a few days ago, so I caught a cold. The judge jokingly asked, is it March 25th? No, 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 Tom quickly waved his hand. This has nothing to do with handling cases, it's my own health. He was afraid that the judge would blame little Adam for this matter. The judge didn't think much and said, after the case is heard, you can go back and have some tea, but please hold on for a while longer. This case is very clear and will end soon. Upon hearing these words, Tom's face turned pale with fear. He turned his head to look at Arthur and cast a pleading gaze at him. Arthur took over the conversation and said, according to the victim's claim, this sunshade umbrella is an expensive custom-made item with a value of 7 shillings and 6 pence. Moreover, only one batch of this type of sunshade umbrella was produced, so it has a unique commemorative significance. Therefore, she hopes that the security court can make a comprehensive evaluation of the stolen goods based on their value for use and collection. The judge asked, did the victim appear in court today? Arthur replied, due to the victim's busy work and numerous affairs, she has applied not to attend this trial, and this application has already been officially approved by the court before. The judge scratched his head awkwardly and then pretended to rub his temples, saying, I'm really old. How could I forget about this? He lifted his hammer and lightly tapped it, saying, next, summon the defendant Adam Evans. As the iron door opened, little Adam, wearing handcuffs and thin clothes, was taken with heavy steps by the bailiff to the defendant's dock. But due to his short stature, only half of his head can be seen standing behind the defendant's seat. Therefore, the judge had to authorize him to stand on the outside of the defendant's seat, so that the judge and jury could observe his changes in expression and behavior during the trial. Little Adam looked around with trembling fear, and the large defendant's seat was empty, with only him standing alone here. Although he has been here many times, today is the first time he feels how terrifying it is when so many pairs of eyes converge on him in the whole room. His gaze swept over everyone present and finally settled on Arthur, who stood tall and standing like a sharp sword. He gained courage from Arthur's calm and confident expression. Although he was still afraid in his heart, he still gathered his strength and greeted everyone present with a slightly trembling voice. Mr. Judge, Mr. Police, and all the ladies and gentlemen who have come all the way to see me, thank you for your hard work. Good morning. As soon as this sentence was finished, the jury immediately heard a burst of relaxed and joyful laughter. Even the usually serious sheriff couldn't help but laugh and say, Adam, they're not here to see you perform, but to determine whether you're guilty. Little Adam's mind immediately flashed with Arthur's admonition, and he quickly admitted, I am guilty. The judge suppressed a smile and asked, why did you confess so quickly? Because it was indeed something I stole. I was wandering around Central Street at the time, wondering if I could try my luck and pick up a few coins from the cracks in the bricks. But I suddenly noticed a large group of people gathering ahead, so I followed in and saw a beautiful lady with a beautiful umbrella. At that time, I thought, oh my God, she must have lost her head in the sun. With such beautiful weather, she still had to bring an umbrella when going out. So I followed up. Little Adam had just mentioned this when he heard a few clicks of his knuckles tapping on the table. That was the secret code agreed upon between Arthur and him, which meant to stop him from continuing. So little Adam naturally stopped talking. The judge didn't notice what was happening yet, so he naturally continued, and then you stole her umbrella. Arthur spoke up and said, at least that's what our indictment says. The sheriff was very dissatisfied with Arthur's sudden interruption. He frowned and said, Officer Arthur, please remain silent when I ask the defendant. There will be an opportunity for you to speak next. All right, Adam, you can continue. So, did you steal Ms. Nancy's umbrella? Little Adam received Arthur's signal and naturally understood how to answer next. He copied Arthur's statement as he had just said, at least that's what Mr. Police said in his indictment. I'm guilty, I'm sorry, I'm guilty. At least that's what the indictment says. The sheriff looked at little Adam with his head down and tears streaming down his face, then at Arthur with an expressionless expression, and then connected to the statements of both parties. The judge's eyebrows furrowed tighter and tighter. Suddenly, he seemed to have figured something out, and his face turned black with a brush. Adam, I am now issuing a formal inquiry to you. Did the police use any or all improper means during your arrest and interrogation? Agares saw this scene and laughed heartily, holding his stomach in his arms. He placed one hand on Arthur's shoulder and leaned against him, saying, Arthur, you are truly the villain I have in mind. You are truly a born devil. Once the seed of doubt is planted, it will never be eradicated. The next step is to see how you guide this confused old man and judge. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Good play opening. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Good play opening. Faced with the severe questioning from the sheriff, Adam trembled with fear. He glanced at Arthur on the prosecution bench and then at the sheriff, who seemed to be burning all over. He was filled with tears in his eyes, standing alone, weak and helpless, at a loss. Arthur spoke calmly, his tone remaining calm and unchanged, as if he was speaking not of a human, but of a precise machine. Mr. Judge, the police did not use any means of torture to extract a confession, as stated clearly in the indictment. The defendant Adam Evans voluntarily accepted arrest and confessed to the crimes he committed. All interrogation processes are conducted in accordance with the internal principles of the police, and can withstand the tests of you and the general public. Adam heard Arthur speak, so he silently shed tears and nodded uncontrollably. He choked up and said intermittently, Mr. Judge, the police have not resorted to any means of torture to extract a confession. I confess my crimes without hesitation, as stated in the indictment. Yes, I am sorry, I am guilty. Arthur and Adam's reaction directly angered the sheriff and made him more convinced of his speculation. He raised his hammer and slammed it hard into the front of the case, almost in a growling tone, forcing him to ask. Adam. I'm asking you, it's you. Why do you care about what is said in the indictment? Why repeat what the police said? Why unconditionally agree with others' opinions? Do you know what will happen to you if the police indictment is established? Your neck will be hung on a noose, and you will be sentenced to death. Oh, child, don't be foolish. Do you know which end you are standing on? I'm giving you a chance. Let you expose the truth to the public, only then can you receive a fair judgment. Adam was so frightened by the enraged judge that he couldn't stop crying. He fell to the ground and choked, saying, I'm sorry, I'm guilty. Mr. Judge, I'm sorry, I made you angry. As soon as he finished speaking, a slightly chubby middle-aged lady popped up from the jury seat. She was like a spring that had been under enough pressure and suddenly stood up, angrily accusing the judge. I don't understand any laws, nor do I know what police principles are. But from my perspective as a mother of 3, you can't shout so loudly at a 9-year-old child, let alone threaten him with the death penalty. This is not only disrespectful, but also immoral. You can't do this to him. The middle-aged lady's words immediately resonated with the mothers present. They loudly accused the sheriff and Arthur, complaining about why they had to take such a young child to court to suffer, and even threatened to go to the Supreme Court to protest against the unfair treatment they received in court after the trial ended. The judge of the peace held the gavel and struck them several times, but no matter what, they couldn't stop their mouths and instead made their curses even louder. The law enforcement wanted to go up and maintain order, but when they saw these women so indignant, they couldn't help but feel nervous. Most of the law enforcement officers are also married, and they understand that reasoning with angry women is not a wise choice. Moreover, in this matter alone, they are also inclined to support the ladies. The ladies haven't finished speaking yet, and the men have also begun to express their opinions. The company employee wearing glasses spoke up and said, Judge, if I remember correctly, Adam Evans is only on suspicion of committing a crime and has not yet been convicted. But your tone seems to be trying a real criminal. And I see that this child is quite polite and has behaved very well since appearing in court. I really can't believe he will commit a crime. The factory technician with a big and round waist also nodded and said, this child named Adam is much stronger than the troublemaker in my house. The troublemaker in my house is 2 years older than him, but I don't even know how to say hello when I see his father. This child looks gentle, and if my son is like him, I don't know how much trouble I need to save. Faced with the lackluster law enforcement officers and the restless jury, the magistrate had no choice but to wipe his sweat with a handkerchief and humbly plead. Please be kind, gentlemen and ladies, pay some attention to court order. I assure you, I will pay attention to my tone in the future. This is my mistake, and I apologize to you. The ladies rolled their eyes at the magistrate when they saw him make a promise and angrily sat back in their seats. The men also closed their mouths and prepared to see if the situation would improve in the future. The scene was as silent as death, but the almost frozen air was filled with the smell of gunpowder. The court clerk sitting under the judge noticed the atmosphere at the scene, which was like a deep winter. He couldn't help but propose to the judge. Sir, I don't think this situation is suitable for continuing the trial of the case. I suggest taking a temporary 10-minute break to calm everyone's mind. The magistrate quickly descended the slope and said, since that's the case, let's take a 10-minute break. Ladies, what do you think? None of the ladies were willing to talk to the judge, and at a critical moment, it was Mrs. Peel, who knew the sheriff, who came out to resolve the situation. The development of things like this is something that no one wants to see. Therefore, we respect your decision. The magistrate, as granted amnesty, covered his head and hurriedly prepared to go to the back hall for a cup of tea to extinguish the fire. And the law enforcement officers are also preparing to take Xiao Yadong, who was sitting on the ground crying uncontrollably, back to the waiting room. The ladies of the jury felt their hearts shatter when they saw him crying like this. Upon seeing this, Mrs. Peel reluctantly suggested, let me accompany him. I know how to calm the child's emotions. Although this may not be the norm, if Adam's emotions do not improve, the trial may not be able to continue. At this moment, the magistrate had no courage to say a word of no. Even if he showed a hint of unwillingness, these ladies would probably tear him apart on the spot. He nodded and said, thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Peel. The other ladies also spoke up and demanded, Madam, I'll go with you too. They are really going too far. I can't imagine how the court interrogates me. My husband used to want his child to study law and grow up to become a judge. Now it seems like a bad idea. If he really learns the law, he might not even recognize his mother in the future. The security judge was scolded by the ladies, but they dared not say a word back. Now he just wants to leave this place of right and wrong as soon as possible. However, before his buttocks could leave his seat, Arthur, who had been silent all along, suddenly spoke up. I'm sorry for taking up everyone's precious rest time, but are you willing to sacrifice just 10 minutes to listen to me? Arthur unbuttoned his coat and tailcoat, and placed the police uniform and police knife on the seat behind him. He rolled up the tight cuffs of his shirt, propped his 2 sturdy arms on either side of the prosecution seat, and pleaded with everyone wearing only a white shirt. The following statement, I am not speaking to you as a Metropolitan Police Inspector, nor as a prosecutor in this case, nor as an executioner who wants to put little Adam on the gallows. But like everyone else, I am just an ordinary London citizen with simple moral concepts and normal values. I am a good friend who knows the defendant Adam Evans in this case, understands his family situation, interests, behavioral habits, and past achievements. For this case, as well as my personal experience over the past 6 months, I would like to briefly talk to everyone. End of this chapter. 10. Chapter 10 The Strongest Tone from Scotland Field. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 The Strongest Sound from Scotland Field. As soon as Arthur's words were spoken, the noisy court hearing immediately quieted down. The probationary judge on the side asked the magistrate, Sir, is this in accordance with the rules? The sheriff had a dark face. It was obvious that Arthur was quite angry with him, but at this point he had no intention of meddling in these trivial matters. It's recess time now. Officer Arthur's right is to do whatever he wants. I can't keep his mouth shut. Although the sheriff did not object, the members of the jury still held biases against Arthur's previous behavior, believing that Arthur must have forced a confession from Adam the younger. If it weren't like this, why would it scare Adam into incoherent crying? Just as the men in the jury were preparing to go outside for some fresh air, the women were busy comforting Xiaoya. However, as the center of the vortex, little Adam held back tears and wanted to stay at the scene. He whispered, "Officer Arthur is a good person." One of the ladies said, "Adam, you don't have to be afraid. With us here, he doesn't dare to do anything to you. You don't have to say these heartless words." Mrs. Peel also held his little hand in pain and said, "With me here, no one of them wants to touch you. If you want to cry, just cry. Tell us all your grievances, and we will give you a fair judgment." But little Adam, holding back his tears, shook his head and said, "No, I'm telling the truth. Officer Arthur is the second best person in my heart, second only to Officer Tom's wife. Officer Tom's wife repaired many bad clothes for me and told me beautiful stories. Officer Arthur is the only person on the street who is willing to listen to me seriously. He even gave me some money and is my good friend." Ladies feel dizzy when they hear this. Oh my God! What exactly is going on here? But he just wanted to put you on the gallows. Are you sure he's really your friend? The men were also puzzled when they heard this, and they asked Arthur. "Officer, can you explain to us why you exhibited inconsistent behavior?" Arthur saw that everyone's gaze was focused on him, and the stone hanging in his heart finally settled down. He calmly stated, "It is my responsibility as a prosecutor and a police officer to prosecute the defendant. Since the first day of the establishment of the Greater London Police Department, I have been informed that my responsibility is to bring all criminals to justice. Little Adam did indeed steal that umbrella, and he never concealed it from me. He is a very honest child. Since the first day I met him, I have always known that he is an honest and trustworthy child. We can chat without any hesitation, exchange opinions with each other, discuss our own troubles, and give advice on our respective troubles. Since he did indeed commit theft, when I appear as a prosecutor in court, I cannot deny his mistake without conscience and let him evade legal punishment. Because that won't help him correct his behavior, it will only increase his evil behavior and breed deeper evil thoughts. But on the other hand, little Adam is also my good friend. Therefore, when I leave the prosecutor's seat, I must also consider his situation at this time. Although he has violated the law, I believe that stealing a sunshade would result in hanging. Is this sentencing standard too heavy? I need to save my friend, even if he has committed a crime. I hope he can have a chance to make corrections. Instead of hastily ending one's life at the age of 9. I must apologize for my actions just now, as I personally caused a wrong impression on the jury and the judge, which affected your correct judgment. I am very ashamed and very sorry about this." Arthur slightly bowed and said, "I'm sorry everyone." As soon as Arthur finished speaking, the tense atmosphere that had just permeated the courtroom dissipated invisibly. The gentlemen and ladies of the jury have all calmed down, and even the sheriff is not in a hurry to go to the back hall for tea. The gentlemen smiled and waved their hands one by one, saying, "We should apologize to you." "I'm sorry, officer, we misunderstood you before." The ladies also blushed and apologized with embarrassment. "I almost treated you like a villain." "Oh my goodness. You're just a gentleman. You must have received a lot of education, speak politely, and have a clear heart between public and private. We should give you a chance to speak up." "Officer, it's not your fault, we didn't figure it out. I'm a quick-witted person, you know, that's how mothers are." The magistrate awkwardly scratched his wig. "Arthur, you know I do have some opinions about Scotland Yard. But that's not against you, but there are other legal concerns. I don't dislike you as a person, and even have a little appreciation for you." Arthur saw a significant improvement in the atmosphere on site, so he smiled and said, "May I start speaking now?" Of course, there is no doubt about it. This is your right, no one can stop you. Arthur picked up his uniform from the chair and asked, pointing to the badge on it. As you can see, I am a police officer from a Scottish field. I am fortunate to have been working in this field since I graduated from college. Unfortunately, I have been working in this field since I graduated from college. I, like all my colleagues, earn a weekly salary of 12 shillings and work 7 days a week for 14 hours a day, patrolling over 15 miles. I don't want to deceive everyone. This job is very tiring and not decent, but these are not the most difficult problems for me to overcome in my work. I completely understand why the ladies and gentlemen present had such great hostility towards me at the beginning of the trial. Because even in daily work, we face such malice, even more blatantly and directly. During the 6 months I have been working at the Scotland Yard, there have been a total of 60 incidents of police assaults in the Greenwich area where I am located, but ironically, there are less than 30 police officers in our local area. I have many colleagues who joined me at the same time, but less than 1/3 still remain with me. Some of them left because their salaries were too low and their work intensity was too high. But for the vast majority, it's because we don't feel any respect at work, and we even feel more guilty than criminals. People all over the world are full of hostility towards us and want to cause us some trouble anytime, anywhere. But I don't blame those people, just like I won't blame the gentlemen and ladies present today. Because if someone could put me on the gallows at any time, then I probably wouldn't give them any good looks either. But is it true that all police officers want to put criminals on the gallows? The example of little Adam is already here today. I don't want to put him on the gallows, but my duty does not allow it. Take a look at our legal provisions. Destruction of roads, death penalty. Cutting down trees, death penalty. Stealing envelopes, death penalty. Salvage of sunken ship relics, death penalty. Going out at night with a blackened face and execution. Stealing items of value of 5 shillings or more is punishable by death. Unmarried mother conceals miscarriage, still sentenced to death. If I were to elaborate on our death penalty regulations, I would probably not be able to finish them until dark. This strange phenomenon was not only discovered by me personally. Lord Samuel Romery had already proposed the need to reform our criminal law in Parliament as early as 1808, but unfortunately, his efforts were not effective. In 1808, we established over 160 death sentences, and after more than 20 years of effort, we have now added more than 70 more. But has the rapid increase in the number of executions effectively improved the public security environment? Unfortunately, I have to report another set of data to everyone. In 1805, there were 4,605 arrests for criminal offences in England and Wales alone. And last year, just last year. Gentlemen, ladies, do you guess this number has decreased? No. Of course not. Last year, we had a staggering 30,000 criminal cases in England and Wales, a 6-fold increase. That is to say, the increase in death penalty charges not only does not help us improve the environment, but also leads to a sharp increase in crime rates. Of course, saying so does not mean that I support the abolition of the death penalty, but I hope to measure minor crimes at a more appropriate scale. I don't understand our society. I don't understand why stealing 5 shillings is punishable by death. In 1825, more than 70 banks collapsed, causing significant losses to the deposits of countless depositors. Those bank partners stole far more than 5 shillings, but I didn't see any of them hanging on the gallows. I don't understand this society. I don't know exactly why I'm doing this job. Although I'm enforcing the law and fulfilling my duties, I always feel like I'm committing a crime. I don't understand his mother, and no one told me why. Why did my friend die for 5 shillings, while some people still live well despite suffering a loss of £5 million? When I joined the company, I often recited the police instructions, which told me, police should always maintain good communication with the public and respect the historical tradition of police are the public is the police. But now, the public tells me that I am not one of them. And even though I am a police officer, I always want to make statements that do not align with my responsibilities. I have been confused about this until I read a notice recently. It's precisely because of it. I just decided to appear in this position today. I will leave this announcement for myself and also want to share it with everyone. No one is a secluded island, everyone is a part of the vast continent. If the waves wash away a rock, Europe will become fewer. Like a cape losing a corner, just like losing a piece of your friend or your own territory. Everyone's death is my sorrow, because I am a member of humanity. So, do not ask for whom the funeral bell tolls, it crows for you. Thank you all, thank you for being willing to listen to a soon-to-be resigned patrol officer say this irrelevant nonsense here. Because this will probably be my last appearance in a security court. Thank you very much. Arthur's chest undulated, panting heavily, and sweat soaked his white shirt, reflecting his broad and open chest. Although he knew his emotions would definitely be excited by the speech, he was even surprised to achieve this level. The court was silent, and everyone's gaze fell on his face. But after a brief moment of tranquility, the courtroom began to hear sparse applause. Next, everyone stood up from their seats. Quickly, applause converged into a ball, exploding like lightning and thunder in the security court. Accompanied by cheers and cheers, Officer Tom wept and knelt down in front of Arthur, holding on to his thigh. Arthur, I am very heartbroken. I am very heartbroken. Why did we lose an outstanding colleague like you? I don't understand, I really don't understand. Well done. Officer Arthur. That's great. Why not punish £5 million and hold on to 5 shillings instead? I can't understand either. This law should have been changed long ago. I don't agree with sentencing Adam to hanging. This is irresponsible for public life. Even the sheriff couldn't help but give Arthur an appreciative look, as he applauded and spoke to everyone. Allow me to reintroduce to you, Sir Arthur Hastings, the best police officer in Great Britain, a role model for the public, and the strongest voice from Scotland Yard. But upon hearing these words, Arthur was momentarily stunned and then slowly lowered his head. Officer Arthur Hastings. He caressed the police badge on his uniform in front of him, revealing a slightly bitter smile. Sorry, it's not anymore. Just as everyone was in celebration, a gentleman wearing a black top hat sitting in the audience suddenly hooked his hand at the servant next to him. He lowered his voice and ordered, "You go to the Scotland Yard right away. I need to get the personal information of Officer Arthur Hastings right away." The servant leaned slightly and said, "I will obey your orders, Sir Peel." End of this chapter.